In the video Martin Luther and his kidney stones, we already learned a lot about him and the reasons for his behavior. This part now deals with his hearing conflicts, through which we learn more interesting things about his life. Regarding the theory of cerebral-controlled hearing programs, I refer you to the video Beethoven and his Deafness Part 1. Luther's biographies repeatedly state that he was caught in a terrible thunderstorm near Stotternheim on his way from Gotha to Erfurt in the summer of 1505. He is said to have made a vow to Saint Anna that he would become a monk if she would save him. Luther survived and, 2 weeks after this event, completely surprising all his friends, went to a monastery of the Augustinian order. It is controversial in Luther's research whether the thunderstorm event actually took place or whether it is a myth. However, with the help of Germanische Heilkunde, this question can be clarified. Luther had auditory hallucinations at times. So at times he was in the Great Hearing Constellation, i.e., he had two territorial hearing conflicts going on at the same time. I would like to say the following about the thunderstorm event. Luther had recurring hearing loss and hearing crisis. He describes it several times as a ringing, whizzing, and roaring and rushing noise. Below are a few quotes from him about his hearing problems. Since I was in Coburg in 1530, the whistling and ringing plagued me so much as if a wind came out of my head, so to speak, blowing and rushing like a main river. I was disturbed by the sound of ringing, or rather the roaring, like a windmill. Similar to the sound of windmill, blades similar to thunder. Unless I have a thundering noise in my head for about a month. My head begins to fill with ringing, even thunder. Luther describes a thunderstorm. His comments clearly suggest a DHS during a thunderstorm. The Stotternheim event is therefore not a legend, but actually happened. Notably, Luther was also constantly plagued by attacks of dizziness during his sudden hearing loss. This is an indication that he also fell during his thunderstorm experience. The DHS during the thunderstorm in the summer of 1505 was Luther's first hearing conflict. Luther was excessively afraid of hell. This was because he probably accidentally killed a fellow student. See Dietrich Emme, Collected Contributions to the Biography of the Young Martin Luther. From his perspective, it was a final reminder to live a godly life. Otherwise, he would end up in hell. Therefore, in the years that followed, all his thoughts revolved around obtaining the grace of God. He bought indulgences, studied the Bible, and even made a pilgrimage to Rome. There he slid up the Lateran stairs on his knees and redeemed himself from his sins. And not surprisingly, with our knowledge of Germanische Heilkunde, he came up with a solution to his thunderstorm DHS for the first time. On the way back from his arduous trip to Rome in 1511, he suffered his first hearing loss in Florence and was unable to travel further. But as soon as he got back home, the doubts began again. His thoughts always revolved around one question: would God forgive his mistakes and grant him grace or not? I described what happened next, the Tower experience and the beginning of the Reformation in the video Luther's Kidney Stones. What remains clear is that the thunderstorm caused DHS was his first territory-related hearing conflict. If another person comes along on the opposite side, the person affected hears voices. As a reminder, the small hearing constellation, as we found it in Beethoven, is not accompanied by hearing voices, unlike the large one. Things get interesting about Luther's auditory hallucinations in 1521. Luther had to go into hiding after the imperial ban was imposed on him. For his safety, he was quotation marks, kidnapped to the Wartburg. The symptoms at the organ level tell us that this stay in Wartburg must have been another drastic experience for him. He throws the famous inkstand at the devil and speaks to him. Luther must have suffered a second hearing conflict at the Wartburg, which brought him into the greater healing constellation. So what might this second DHS have looked like? Luther was considered dead during his fourth stay at Wartburg. It was said that he had been kidnapped and probably murdered. However, it was only a ruse by the Saxon elector to pull Luther out of the firing line after the imperial ban had been imposed on him in Worms. Luther's Reformation therefore progressed without him. Various movements developed, such as iconoclasts, Anabaptists, etc. There were violent riots against priests, monks, nuns, churches, and monasteries by the people. The clergy felt the full wrath of centuries of exploitation. Now put yourself in Luther's position. You already know him well enough. Luther, who has fought for years for his salvation and has finally found a loophole to avoid ending up in hell, sits alone in the Wartburg and is told bits and pieces of news for months about what is going on in the country. Luther will have heard sentences at the Wartburg like, in Erfurt, the Anabaptists killed 2 monks because they did not want to confess to you, or the iconoclasts attacked a monastery near Wittenberg. They called images the works of the devil and burned them in your name. Anyone who didn't confess to you was killed, regardless of whether they were men or women. Or perhaps he overheard a conversation between 2 servants. To hell with Luther and the suffering he causes. Let him end up in hell. How will Martin have reacted? He will have been blown away and couldn't have believed his ears. What I'm hearing can't be true. Countless sins were committed in his name. Once again, everything was at stake. This will have been his second hearing conflict with the result of the large hearing constellation and the hearing of devilish voices and the throwing of the inkwell at the devil. In December 1521, Luther secretly left the Wartburg and ensured order in Wittenberg according to his wishes. In 1522, he finally fully returned and fought for his Reformation. The topic of tracks can also be explained very nicely using Luther's second hearing conflict. Brief repetition. The moment the DHS hits us, the body uses its senses to program everything it hears, feels, tastes, smells, etc. These are the so-called tracks, allergies in conventional medicine. If the individual comes into contact with a track again, the conflict is activated again. Mother Nature wants to warn us with the motto, "Watch out, there was something there." When Luther leaves the Wartburg, his auditory hallucinations disappear. They only come back one more time, namely during his fourth stay at the Coburg fortress in 1530. The Reformation took place again, this time at the Reichstag in Augsburg, without him. Luther could not take part because he was still considered an outlaw. Once again, he was stuck in a castle. This day will have been a terrible recurrence. Again, he only gets information second-hand from hearsay. The situation at the castle will have been his track. And so he got into the hearing constellation again, and his hearing of voices and noises came back. During his stay in Coburg, Luther reported the hearing symptoms mentioned above, as well as that he was regularly tormented by the cries of jackdaws in the morning hours. Jackdaws are corvids. And what these intelligent blackbirds stood for in the Middle Ages should be clear to everyone. For Christians, they were the devil's ambassadors. They announced death. Actually clear when you know that the Catholic Church either adopted everything about Germanic culture or turned it into the opposite. Ravens were loyal companions of Odin. The jackdaws were Luther's renewed hallucinatory devil. Luther leaves the Coburg fortress in October, and again, oh divine miracle, the devil leaves him alone again. Yeah, no track, no hallucination. Very simple. Isn't it fascinating that the cause of the Reformation was essentially a thunderstorm in which a law student caught a DHS? It is always inspiring to see what Dr. Harmer has discovered.